this shit!
Look how they massacred my boy.
Alright boys and girls, I hope you're having a lovely day, okay? Today guys, I want to talk about the Tony Hawk series, okay? Now, for those that don't know, Tony Hawk's is like my favorite gaming franchise of all time, okay? There's no gaming series I love more than the Tony Hawk series. Some of you guys could probably guess that, you know, with the Tony Hawk's Underground poster behind me and the amount that I talk about it on this channel, okay? I always mention Tony Hawk's games. It's just a series that I've grown up with over the years, okay? And I've never stopped playing them, okay? Even to this day, I still go back and play some of my favorites, okay? And I just love them. I just love so many of the games that came from this series. So I figured, you know what guys, why not do an entire video dedicated to just a load of different Tony Hawk's games, okay? Some of them good and some of them not so much. Now I will say guys, there are quite a few games that are going to be missing from this video, okay? There's going to be some that you go like, Majel, how have you not talked about this game or that game? Well guys, I do plan on doing a part 2 to this video, okay? So stay tuned for that. I don't know when that's going to come, but if there's a game that I haven't talked about today, chances are it's going to be in part 2. So without further ado then boys, I guess we'll kick things off with where it all started, okay? And that is Tony Hawk Skateboarding for the PS1.
Tony Hawk's Pro Skater. Now everyone thinks they can skate like Tony.
Okay guys, so I'll be totally honest with you here. I don't have a ton of experience with Tony Hawk Skateboarding, okay? Like, where I first got introduced to the series was Pro Skater 2, and I think a lot of people would have been the same. So my first time I, like, properly played this game would have been, like, a couple of years ago. So, obviously, that's not exactly ideal. You know, this would have been amazing to play when it originally came out. Playing it a few years ago is not, like, the best way to play this game. Especially now with, like, the remake of the first two games. You know, going back to play Pro Skater 1 or Skate... I call it Pro Skater 1, but it's actually called Tony Hawk Skateboarding. That's so annoying to me. But yeah, with that remake out, lads, going back to this one is not the easiest. And by far, the biggest problem with this game, in my opinion, guys, is the lack of a manual, which sounds absolutely criminal to say with a Tony Hawk's game without manuals. It doesn't sound right.
What? Well, this is insane! That's impossible!
But yeah, this game doesn't allow you to do manuals, so it's really hard to do combos in this game. The best ways I've found to rack up score in this game is to just, like, spam grab tricks and special tricks, so going up ramps and just doing that usually gets you decent score, but unfortunately you're not going to be able to get, like, millions of points on this game like you can on some of the others. With all that said though, guys, is this a bad game? Absolutely not, okay? This is still a phenomenal game, especially for the time. Like, this game came out in the 90s, okay, and it's still a great game. It's just this series was so consistently good over the years, and it just constantly built upon each installment, like, as they would roll out, okay? So this game, just, like, going back to it is obviously not as good when you compare it to the others. But in terms of, like, the best things about this game, guys, okay, the soundtrack here is phenomenal, okay? I mean, that's just a reoccurring theme with the old school Tony Hawk's games. All of the soundtracks are amazing, and also the maps in this game. The maps in this game are still iconic, like the warehouse map. That's one of the most goated maps ever. Not to mention the fact you got San Francisco, downtown, mall, school one. Like, there's some absolutely banger maps in this game, so yeah, that's definitely one of the best aspects of it. But yeah, in terms of coming back to it, guys, not the easiest one, okay? It's not aged as well as the others, unfortunately, and the biggest reason for me, at least, is the lack of the manual. If there was a manual in this game, I would honestly probably enjoy it a lot more. But yeah, considering how old this game is, guys, it's still absolutely amazing. I just wish I could have played it when it originally came out, because I would have loved this game even more, but still, it is a good one, just not aged amazingly. Okay, guys, next up, I want to talk about Pro Skater 2, but we're going to be talking about the Game Boy Advance version. Now, as you guys can see, I've got my cheeky little custom case here, okay? I've always got to show off my custom cases, because, honestly, I'm quite proud of them. They look pretty damn tasty, in my opinion. But yeah, some of you guys are probably wondering, like, Majel, why are you talking about this game on the Game Boy Advance? Why are you not talking about the PS1 version? Basically, guys, I'm going to be talking about the PS1 version in part 2. So, again, stay tuned for that. I don't know when that's coming, but I'll talk about that one for part 2. But yeah, let's talk about the Game Boy Advance one, okay? Because this is a really, really bizarre port. So you're probably wondering, is it even possible to port this game onto the Game Boy Advance? And the answer is yes and no. They did sort of port it, but they also changed it in a lot of ways. Obviously, this is not going to be like a straight port, you know, it's a Game Boy Advance. It's just not powerful enough to port a PS1 game. That's kind of obvious. But they did do an absolutely amazing job at just making their own version of Pro Skater 2 with some of the maps from that game as well. And this game actually has its own version of Hangar in it. Like, I don't know how they did it, but they did. And the gameplay here is actually pretty damn solid as well, guys. Is it amazing? 10 out of 10, the best game ever? No. no, like, obviously, again, with the limitations of the Game Boy Advance, it's not possible, but considering it is on the Game Boy Advance, it plays pretty decently. You can string together some okay combos, you can do your grab tricks, your grinds, your flip tricks, you know, you can do all of that stuff on the Game Boy Advance, which kind of blows me away. All of the objectives you expect from that classic mode Tony Hawk's is all here, okay, you know, getting the skate, you know, knocking over the barrels, getting the high scores, all of that stuff is here on the Game Boy Advance. And on the whole, guys, it's a really impressive version of Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2. It's not the most ideal way of playing it, but if you wanted to play this game portably back in the day, this was pretty damn good. The only things I will say, like, that aren't as good on this, the soundtrack is a notable downgrade. Now, obviously, getting the PS1 soundtrack onto the Game Boy Advance was never going to be possible, okay? There's just not enough room on those Game Boy Advance cartridges. But yeah, the soundtrack here is just honestly kind of just noise. Like, it's just like a looped riff, and it's just, I mean, it's just not great, you know? It's kind of shit.
Cut the shit off, bro. I gotta cut the shit the fuck off.
The other thing I'm not like a massive fan of here, guys, was like the camera angle. I know that obviously there's got to be some limitations with the Game Boy Advance. I know it's not going to be exactly how it was on PS1, but the camera angle that they've chosen here in order to like display this game, it makes it really hard to sort of land your tricks. I don't know how quite to describe it, but it's hard to actually sort of see how you're supposed to land. Like when I'm up in the air doing tricks, it's just quite difficult to sort of know where you're supposed to be. I don't know if I'm making too much sense of how I'm describing this, but yeah, I'm just not a massive fan of the camera angle is the long short of it. It just made the game harder to play, but again, I kind of understand it because it's on the Game Boy Advance. I'm expecting too much, really. So yeah, on the whole, guys, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2 for the Game Boy Advance has no right to be as good as it is. It's a really decent game considering the limitations. It's got tons of different Tony Hawk's maps in the game, including ones from like Pro Skater 1, like you've got Warehouse in this game, I forgot to mention. There's tons of different maps, not just from Pro Skater 2. You've got loads of objectives to complete. It's just a classic Tony Hawk's formula, downscaled to the Game Boy Advance, and it was really impressive. I was honestly blown away by it. So yeah, if you've got a Game Boy Advance, guys, check this one out, because you'll be surprised. Okay, guys, next up, I want to talk about Pro Skater 4 for the PS2. Okay, guys, so I'm not gonna lie to you, Pro Skater 4 is one of my favorite Tony Hawk's games ever, okay? I absolutely adore Pro Skater 4. I honestly don't think it gets the credit it deserves. I feel like when I hear different people talk about this one, you've got like the classic mode fans of this game that, you know, obviously prefer that classic mode formula, and then you've got like the underground fans that obviously like that story formula, and this game is kind of sort of in the middle of those two formulas. Obviously, this game is not like classic mode anymore, like it's just sort of one-to-one objectives where you go up to the person and you get the objective, then you complete them. So the classic mode is pretty much gone now. But what this game does better than any other Tony Hawk's game, this game challenged me, okay? This game is so difficult to actually beat, like, especially if you're new to Tony Hawk's. You probably won't be able to beat this game without really fucking sweating. Like, if you're an average Tony Hawk's player, you'll beat pretty much any other Tony Hawk's game, no problem, okay? Because most of them are quite easy. But this one, nah. This one is hard. When you get up to, like, the pro challenges in this game, they are tough, okay? The Bam Margera one, that shit ain't easy. Even some of those regular objectives in this game are hard, okay? Doing that misty flip over the rooftop gap, that shit is so hard.
I just can't do it. I can't take this shit no more.
I've been playing this game for years and that challenge always gives me problems. However, I did recently discover on my most recent playthrough that you can actually do the misty flip and then manual onto the roof, and that still counts for some reason. It probably shouldn't, but it does, so yeah, thank me later if you do play this game. But yeah, basically what I love about this game, lads, is just how freaking hard it is. I love the difficulty here. Another reason I absolutely love this game, guys, and I don't think I've ever told this even on this channel before, but this game is kind of the reason I'm into retro gaming as much as I am now. Back in the day, I didn't really used to go backwards with game consoles, you know, I would just play the current gen and just stay with that, and then obviously move on to the next generation of consoles when they come out. That's kind of how I did my games. Maybe every now and again I'd have a little dabble on some of my older consoles, but that was pretty rare. It was actually during COVID lockdown that I decided, you know what, I'm gonna get back into retro gaming again. So I remember, like, I went out to CEX and I bought a PS2 because my PS2 was broken, and I just had all of these lofty plans of playing all these old retro games, and I set it up and everything, and I have a little dabble with the the older games, and I was like, yeah, it was pretty fun, and then I sort of put it away, you know, I didn't really come back to it. And that was until I had a little go on Pro Skater 4. I just thought I'd have a little dabble with it, you know, like I did with all of my other older games. You know, I just wanted to try it again, you know, get that little buzz of nostalgia, and then I was just gonna put it away. Pro Skater 4, guys, hooked me onto retro games, because I'd never beaten this game as a kid, okay? This game was just too damn hard to beat as a kid, so I started playing it, I started doing some of the objectives, and I was just, like, I was just hooked, guys. I was immediately hooked back into this game. Yeah, for the first time ever, I ended up playing through the entire game, just because I was really enjoying it, and that's what actually got me back into retro games, because after I finished that, I was just going through and playing through all of the retro games, and playing them properly, not just having a little dabble. I was playing games, you know, all the way through. So yeah, this game is partially responsible for my love for retro games, so for that reason, I have to thank it, and obviously, I have a ton of nostalgia as well with this game when I, you know, used to play it as a kid and stuff. I remember I used to love Ollie the Bum for some reason as a kid. I don't know why, I just did. I just thought he was cool for some reason. But yeah, honestly, guys, I could talk about this game for years if I wanted, okay? There's so many amazing stories I could tell about this one. It's easily one of my favorite Tony Hawk's games ever. I'd probably rank it second on my favorite games of, like, the Tony Hawk series. It's such an amazing game, guys. If you've never played it, please do, okay? Because it's so hard, but it's so fun. Alright, boys, next up, I'm going to talk about Tony Hawk's Underground 2 for the PS2. Okay, guys, so we were getting pretty nostalgic with Pro Skater 4, okay? Underground 2 is arguably more nostalgic for me, okay? This is literally my favorite Tony Hawk's game of all time. I adore it. It's really close between this and Pro Skater 4. I mean, they're neck and neck for me. I love both of these games so much, but this one just edges it slightly, okay? Because this was my first ever Tony Hawk's game that I personally owned. When I was younger, all of my experience that I had with, like, the Tony Hawk's games was pretty much from just playing my brother's copies of the game. My brother had all of the Tony Hawk's games, okay, so if I wanted to play them, I had to play my brother's copies. And you're probably wondering, like, Majel, if you wanted to own them so bad, why would you not just buy them? The problem is, though, is when you're a kid, if you want money, you have to ask your mum, okay, because I'm not gonna have money. I'm like freaking, I don't know, 6, 7 years old. Maybe I could do some chores, I guess, but for the most part, I'm not getting my own money. You know, if I want a game, I've got to ask my mum. My mum had a bit of a rule, though, when it came to buying games. She didn't care what, like, the game was. Like, you know, she'd let me play GTA, she'd let me play, I don't know, States of Emergency. That one was pretty crazy. She'd let us watch what we wanted. We could watch South Park. You know, we used to play and watch all sorts of inappropriate stuff that kids shouldn't be playing or watching.
It's fine. It's fine.
Are you sure?
Yeah. Well, it's fine. It's fine.
Maybe it is fine.
However, guys, what she did care about was buying, like, the same game twice, okay? If my older brother had a game, then she wasn't going to buy it for me. And if I had a game, she wasn't going to buy it for my older brother. You know, she's already bought the game for one of us, so as far as she's concerned, she doesn't want to buy it again. If I ask my mum if I can have a game and my brother's already got it, she'll just tell me to go borrow his. Trouble is, though, me and my older brother did not get along at all growing up, okay? We used to argue a lot. So asking my brother if I could borrow a Tony Hawk's game back then, if we weren't on good terms, which was most of the time, it was like asking Hitler for a cupcake. It wasn't happening. So yeah, like I said, my brother had all of the old Tony Hawk's games, okay? And I was just supremely jealous, okay? Because he got to play these amazing games and I wanted so badly to play them myself. And again, I could maybe play them every now and again, borrow them, but not play them for too long. And we would usually argue. So, you know, as soon as we start arguing, I wasn't allowed to borrow his games anymore. And it used to go on like that. So back in the day, I didn't have any Tony Hawk's games, okay? The only game I had that was even remotely close was Matt Hoffman on PS1. That was like the BMX version of Tony Hawk's. It's not a bad game, guys, don't get me wrong. It was actually quite fun, but it's not on the level of Tony Hawk. For one fateful day, guys, I tried something that I am so thankful that I did, okay? We're in the shop game, okay? I see it there on the shelf, all right? It's like $12.99, I'm pretty sure. I have one of those orange stickers, okay? One of those classic, like, game stickers, all right? I see it there. I'm like, you know what? I know my mum's gonna say no, but I'm gonna ask anyway. Mum, can I have this game, please? And that's all I said. And she said, yes, you can have it. I couldn't fucking believe it. Like, I couldn't believe it. I remember seeing my mum pay for this at the till, and I was just trying to keep my cool, guys, okay? Because I don't want it to look suspicious, you know? I was just trying to contain my excitement, because I was finally gonna own my own Tony Hawk's game, and again, I just couldn't believe it. When I got this game home, guys, I played it, and I played it, and I played it, and I played it. Amazing time. I absolutely loved it. But enough about that, guys, okay? Enough about the nostalgia. Is the actual game any good? In my opinion, yes. This is just a perfect packaged Tony Hawk's game. So, like, reason number one why this is the best Tony Hawk's game ever, you can play as Shrek.
That's it! This is the best game ever!
But in all seriousness, guys, I could list off so many reasons why I think this is the best Tony Hawk's game, and you know what? I'm gonna do it, okay? I'm gonna list off reasons, okay? First of all, classic mode and story mode in one, okay? You've got 2 modes in one, it's essentially 2 games in one. Amazing, okay? Soundtrack, absolutely the best soundtrack in my opinion. Like, name me a game that has Lamb of God, it has Frank Sinatra, Johnny Cash, and hip-hop in the soundtrack. The variety here is ridiculous. And this game has a ton of songs I've just never ever heard in my life before, okay? I mean, there's foreign hip-hop in this game that is not even in English, and it still absolutely slaps. I've discovered so many artists from this game alone. I mean, Atmosphere, trying to find the balance. Like, I love Atmosphere now. This game has an absolutely 10 out of 10 soundtrack, okay? In my opinion, the best soundtrack in all of the Tony Hawk's games, and that is saying something. This game has a ridiculous amount of secret skaters as well. Obviously, we did mention Shrek, but there's even more, guys, okay? You've got Steve-O riding around on a mechanical bull. You've got a jester, because why the hell not? You can play as Bigfoot in this game. You can play as Paulie, Wheels of Fury, who's just a guy in a wheelchair. The secret skaters in this game are just insane. The story here, guys, I won't lie, is not like the best story in the world. This isn't Martin Scorsese or anything, but I do personally love the story because it just reminds me of my childhood. This game has just like the most mid-2000s story ever, okay? This is like pure MTV vibes going on in this story. If you guys grew up with MTV back in the day and used to watch things like Jackass or Viva La Bam, okay, this game, the story here will remind you of that. Again, that just gives me like nostalgia at that time, okay? I miss those days, you know, growing up and watching MTV. They were the good old days. Also, this game has probably the best maps in any Tony Hawk's game, in my opinion, just like in terms of sheer consistency. Like, Boston is an amazing map. Berlin is an amazing map. You've got Barcelona, which is an absolutely iconic map. You've got New Orleans, which is arguably my favorite map in any Tony Hawk's game. It's definitely in my top 3. The maps in this game are just absolutely incredible, okay? And there's just so many different lines that you can skate and just go absolutely nuts in this game, okay? And the game allows you to do that, okay? Like, you can rack up a just insane combo in this game. For me, at least, this is where the gameplay truly peaked in the Tony Hawk series, okay? Everything after this one, I feel like is on the decline when it comes to things because it just adds too much, like, nonsense. There's a few gimmicky things they added into Tony Hawk's Underground 2, but it's not as bad. After this one, though, they get really strong on the gimmicks and the gameplay just gets worse and worse. But yeah, for me, this is where it peaks. Anyway, guys, I've talked enough about Underground 2, okay? I've been kissing its ass for a while now. It's just an amazing game, in my opinion, okay? It's my favorite, so obviously I'm a bit biased because of the nostalgia, but I honestly genuinely think it is the best Tony Hawk's game. Alright then, boys, next up I want to talk about Tony Hawk's American Skateland for the DS. Alright guys, so for those who don't know, this game came out at a time with like the Tony Hawk series where when it came to the portable games, it would bounce to and from the PSP and the DS. Like, you had Underground 2 that came out for the PSP, and it is an absolutely amazing like Underground 2 port, arguably actually better than the PS2 version because it had like new maps and stuff.
It's fantastic.
The next Tony Hawk's game though wouldn't come out for the PSP but came out for the DS with American Skateland. After that there was Project 8 that came out for the PSP, and then Proving Ground got a DS port, so it would sort of bounce back and forth between DS and PSP for some reason. So yeah, American Skateland is pretty much American Wasteland, but the DS version of it, okay? And I'll be totally honest, guys, did not have the highest expectations for this one, okay? I honestly expected it to be terrible. I mean, the DS is just not a powerful console, okay? Especially in comparison to the PSP, which, you know, you could literally do straight up ports on the PSP. The DS is definitely not capable of doing ports, so yeah, this is like a sort of a reimagining, if you like, of American Skateland, or American Wasteland, sorry. But honestly, guys, similar to how I felt with Pro Skater 2 on Game Boy Advance, I was actually quite surprised. It is actually genuinely quite good. Is it the greatest game known to man? Is it a 10 out of 10 masterpiece? Well, obviously not, okay? It's not the best Tony Hawk's game by any means, but again, I was expecting this game to be shit, and it definitely wasn't shit. It was actually quite good. Like, first of all, the graphics on this, like, that's one of the areas I was expecting it to be not good, is because the DS, you know, a lot of 3D games kind of look shit. This is not one of them, though. This is actually one of the better looking DS games. It's kind of like a cel-shaded art style, so it's actually aged fairly well for a DS game in comparison to a lot of the other ones. I'm always a sucker for cel-shaded art styles, okay, and it works really well here. I wish more DS games did that. So yeah, I really like the art style here, guys. Gameplay is actually really good as well. You can do combos, you can do tricks, you know, you can do all the classic Tony Hawk's things. And the gameplay is quite good, again, for the DS, and I just wasn't expecting it. I will say the story here is a little bit weird. It's definitely not the same as the PS2 version, and it's got like a weird sort of comic art style. Does not mean like knocking the art style here, it's fine, but for some reason they just sort of uglified all of the characters, so all of them just look look really sort of grotesque and weird.
What the f is that? Holy Jesus Christ.
Yeah, I wasn't really a massive fan of how they did the story here. It just, I don't know, just kind of looked weird to me. But yeah, that's just a small gripe, honestly, guys. It's not really like a big deal. In terms of the soundtrack here, guys, they actually did get like a fair bit of the American Wasteland soundtrack onto the DS. The track list is definitely a lot smaller on the DS version, so I hope you guys like listening to sort of the same songs over and over and over again. I must have listened to Green Day Holiday about 1,500 times, okay, because it just, yeah, the track list is a lot smaller. Not to mention the audio is quite compressed because it is the DS. So yeah, you're not going to get the best like soundtrack experience, but the fact that they even got some songs is actually quite impressive. And honestly, guys, like my only like big critique with this game is just how freaking short it is. Like, this is one of the shortest Tony Hawk's games that I've ever played. I kid you not, I beat this game in I think an hour and a half. Like, I beat it in one sitting. It is insanely short to beat this one. So yeah, that was like the one aspect I was kind of disappointed with, because I was enjoying myself with this game. I wanted to play it longer, you know, I was having a good time with it. But honestly, guys, if the worst part about your game is that it's really short, that's not exactly the worst thing in the world. It just meant that I wanted to play it more. So yeah, I mean, there could be worse problems with your game. So yeah, on the whole, guys, I was pleasantly surprised by this one. Okay, I did not expect to like this game even remotely, but the fact that I actually enjoyed it quite a bit, yeah, this is quite a good game. So if you have a DS, pick it up because it is surprisingly good. Okay then, guys, next up I'm going to talk about Tony Hawk Shred for the PS3. Okay, guys, so for those who don't know, this is a Tony Hawk's game where you use the actual skateboard. You know, like, there's an actual, like, skateboard peripheral in order to play it. You don't play this game with a controller. You actually have to set up, like, a big skateboard thing, you know, and play it with that. Every time I've, like, heard anybody talk about this game, I always hear bad things about it. I've never heard a good word said about this game, so my expectations for this were on the floor. Like, I honestly expected it to be absolutely awful. Yeah, I didn't get off to a great start with this game, lads, okay? For one, the setup of the actual board was an absolute pain in the arse. Like, first of all, the board needs batteries, so I'm like, oh shit, I need batteries. I had to hunt my house down for batteries, looking around everywhere, and eventually I do find some batteries, but then I realized that you need a screwdriver to open the thing. You can't just pull it open, so I'm like, fucking hell, now I need to look for a damn screwdriver. So I had to hunt the house for a screwdriver, and to my shock, I actually did have one. I didn't even realize I did, but yeah, I had a screwdriver. Then you have to calibrate the board, so you gotta like plug this like dongle thing into the PS3, and then you have to like set it up. It's just a massive pain in the arse. It took like 45 minutes just to set this thing up.
Listen, I've had enough of your shit.
Once it's all set up, guys, it doesn't get much better, okay, because you have just this awful cringe intro with Tony Hawk's himself, and yeah, it's just not good. It just really like put me in a mood of like, oh, this game is gonna be shit.
You must be stoked after tearing through the competition to be named the Master. Can you believe you made it this far? Come on in. I hope you don't mind, but I invited a few friends over, because you're kind of a big deal.
But once all of that was out of the way, guys, I got to actually play the game and experience it. Was it terrible? Honestly, I didn't think it was as bad as I thought it was going to be. Is it good? No, it's not good, alright? It's not a good game, but it's definitely not as bad as I thought. Like, as I was going through the tutorial and I was just sort of working out how to, you know, push with the board and do the grinds and the tricks and all of that stuff, I was actually having a decent amount of fun, okay? Because it was quite simple, you know? It's just giving you simple instructions to follow, so it was quite fun. It's when you get into the actual core of the game that this game starts to turn a bit shit, because it just overcomplicates things and the controls just get really out of hand and it's just really difficult. Like, take the flip trick, for example, in this game, okay? Now, in the actual Tony Hawk's, doing a flip trick is the easiest thing you can do, okay? It's literally just pressing the square button and pointing in a direction, okay? It's as easy as it gets. In this game, you have to, like, do a manual and you have to, like, flick your board one way and then back the other way, and it sounds quite simple, but fucking hell, boys, it is not simple, trust me, alright? It's genuinely hard to do, at least for someone who doesn't do skateboarding in real life, and I don't really know anyone that would do skateboarding in real life that would play this game, because you wouldn't, would you? You would just go outside with a real skateboard. You're not going to be sitting in your fucking living room playing Tony Hawk Shred. So yeah, doing flip tricks in this game was pretty hard, okay? So that was like one thing, and just in general, like, when the game just gives you complicated objectives that like aren't simple, the game is just an absolute mess. Like, I don't know what the fuck is going on half the time. When things are simple in this game, it was actually quite fun, like surprisingly fun. It's just when it goes complicated, and unfortunately, a lot of the actual core of the game is needlessly complicated. If it just stuck to simple stuff, I probably would have enjoyed it. Like, some of the objectives in this game, okay, is to get like pretty damn high scores, okay? In order to get high scores, you have to do quite complicated tricks, and obviously trying to do all of that is not easy, like I was saying. And obviously I was getting quite frustrated with it because I was trying to do what the game wanted me to do, and I just couldn't for the life of me get this freaking board to do what I wanted it to. And it's actually quite funny because I remember getting quite frustrated with it and just like doing random things on the board just because why not, because I was just pissed off at this point. So I just started spazzing around with the board, and to my shock, it was working. I was actually getting good scores by just doing stupid shit on the board.
I don't know what I'm doing!
And honestly, guys, I think that's why this game just wasn't that good, is that it's needlessly complicated. It needed to be more simple, you know, so that anybody could play it. And unfortunately, it just wasn't that. But with all that said, guys, was this the worst game I've ever played? No, it was quite fun, you know. Standing around in my living room with a fake skateboard was quite fun, surprisingly. So, yeah, I've played worse games in the world. It's definitely not as bad as I thought it was going to be. At the same time, it's a long way from being good. Okay, guys, next up, I want to talk about Tony Hawk's Proving Ground. Okay, guys, so this was at a point in the Tony Hawk sort of time period where a lot of people weren't really into Tony Hawks like they used to be, okay? They were far from their prime days of the PS2. Like, before this, Tony Hawk's was, like, easily, like, the #1 skating game, okay? They were the absolute leaders of skating games. There was nobody above them. Everything else was just, you know, inferior to Tony Hawk's. However, when this game came out, guys, it was no longer the king of skating games, okay? There was a game made by EA called Skate that was at the top at this point. So as I'm playing through Proving Ground, it's quite hard not to notice that this game is just constantly trying to chase the shadow of Skate. And this game tries to basically emulate the feel of Skate, but while also being an arcadey skateboarding game, and unfortunately, it doesn't work for me. Like, one aspect of this game that they for some reason copied from Skate, and in my opinion is one of the worst parts about Skate, is the sort of camera angle. Like, when you're playing the Skate games, like, for some reason the camera is super zoomed into the skater. It makes a lot more sense in Skate because obviously they're trying to sort of emulate that cameraman vibe, like you're almost playing as a cameraman, so it makes sense that you're sort of almost looking up at the skater and it's like quite zoomed in. It makes no sense in this game though. This is an arcadey game. Tony Hawk's will always be an arcadey skater, so why they try to copy a realistic mechanic from Skate, I've got no idea. Back in the day, it used to be other games that used to copy Tony Hawk's, and now Tony Hawk's have gotten to a point where they're copying others, and you know that's not a good sign.
That man's an imposter. That man is the imposter.
Another area this game is very similar to Skate in is the open world. Now, Tony Hawk's has been trying to do open worlds ever since American Wasteland. Obviously, in American Wasteland, they had to cut some corners by trying to hide loading screens through long corridors and stuff. With Proving Ground, they obviously had the technology for it. But in terms of just doing free Skate in this game and chilling in the open world, it does feel very similar to Skate. Not saying that it's copying it or anything, but it does have a similar sort of feel to it. And that's honestly probably one of the best aspects of the game, is the open world here. This game is a really fun sort of chill game if you just want to sort of free skate around in that open world. The soundtrack here is decent. It's not my favorite Tony Hawk soundtrack, but it is decent, and you can just sort of chill and vibe to that soundtrack and then just enjoy the, you know, the entire sort of urban feel of the game. However, it's when you get into the missions of the game that a lot of that stuff just goes out the window. Like, you can no longer just enjoy the chill vibe to this game because there's just so much dumb, gimmicky mechanics shoved into this game. Like, from Underground 2 onwards, like, Tony Hawk's just got obsessed with adding in just strange and weird mechanics. In Underground 2, like I said, they're not that bad in there. They're mostly like you can just sort of miss them and put them to one side and it's not going to bother you. They're slightly more intrusive in American Wasteland. Not as bad, but yes, they're not great. Project 8, they really went hard on the dumb mechanics, and in Proving Ground, they just go full on with the weird and stupid mechanics. Like, this game has got nail the grab, nail the trick, nail the manual, nail that piece of plank to the wall. And this game was just obsessed with this nailing the trick nonsense, which is just not a fun mechanic in the slightest. On top of that, this game has a bunch of missions where you're running off your board doing terrible platforming. There's parts of this game where you're doing shoulder tackles on the skateboard. There's like an entire like mission like just dedicated to that. There's just so many shit mechanics in this game, guys. They focus so much on it. All I want to do is just play the game and just play that classic Tony Hawk's formula, and this game is just obsessed with these shit mechanics. This game genuinely could have been a really strong and good Tony Hawk's game if they just went back to their roots and just stuck to what they're good at, but no, they just weirdly obsessed with this nail the nonsense. And it was just abundantly obvious that Tony Hawk's at this point had just sort of run out of ideas and just run its course at this point. They just didn't know what to do with the franchise, unfortunately. So you end up getting games like this that just are poorly made. So yeah, honestly guys, not a massive fan of Proving Ground. Is it the worst game ever? No. But is it a great Tony Hawk's game? No, far from it. Okay guys, next up we're going to talk about Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 5 for the PS4. Okay guys, so I was saying that Proving Ground's not a great Tony Hawk's game. Well, Proving Ground looks like Shakespeare in comparison to this garbage. And there's not too many games in the world that I actually hate, like physically hate. There's games that I'm not a big fan of, there's games that maybe are not my cup of tea, there's games I might even dislike, but games I truly hate, that's a small list of games, okay? There's not many. This game though, guys, is on that list, okay? This is one of the worst games I have ever played because it is a genuine insult to the amazing franchise that is Tony Hawk's. I hate this game.
I can't take it anymore! I just want to die! We all want to die!
So if you've never played this game, you might be wondering what is so bad about Pro Skater 5. Well, to start things off, this game is glitchy as fuck. This game is just an absolute bug fest, okay? There is just so many just awful glitches in this game. It's borderline unplayable at times. The gameplay here feels horrendous, okay? Absolutely torrid gameplay. And that's not something I can say about very many Tony Hawk's games, okay? Because the Tony Hawk series is known for its amazing fluent gameplay. Pro Skater 5 feels just awful. There's just an awful, unsatisfying feeling as you're playing this Tony Hawk's game. It just feels like an off-brand version of Tony Hawk's, except for it's not. It's an actual Tony Hawk's game. The mission structure here is just completely uninspired and is just genuinely awful. Like, the missions that you're doing in this game feel so out of place in a Tony Hawk's game. It feels like something you would get out of like a Wii Party game, not a Tony Hawk's game. Like, why am I doing tricks to avoid my head from exploding? Like, what is this garbage? Even something as simple as grinding in this game is not good. Like, something that they figured out in Tony Hawk's 1 is bad in this game. It feels just... Nah, I hate this game. It's boiling my blood just thinking about it. I genuinely do not understand why they made this game. Well, I do to an extent, like, for money, obviously. Like, they just thought they'd milk the cow for that last little drop of milk that it had.
Give me money. Money me. Money now. Me a money needing a lot now.
But how did they even make this game and decide, you know what, that's ready, okay, let's release that? No, it's a bad game, it's awful, and I don't even want to talk about it anymore because it's genuinely one of the worst games I've ever played, and because it's in my favorite series of all time, Tony Hawk's, it insults me. This game's existence insults me, so no more. I'm never talking about it again. Okay, boys, let me just take a little breather here. Okay, I needed that after talking about that fucking awful game that will not be mentioned, okay? But yeah, let's talk about Pro Skater 1 and 2 for the PS4. So yeah, obviously guys, this is a complete remake of Pro Skater 1 and 2, okay? They basically took those games and just completely transformed them, and I'll be totally honest, I'm not like a big fan of remakes in general. I find a lot of them somewhat pointless. Like, if you take The Last of Us remake, for example, like, what is the fucking point? The Last of Us 1 looks good already, it didn't need a remake, there was just completely no point in that remake, and I feel like a lot of remakes are starting to feel like that. It seems increasingly rare that they're remaking games that actually needed remakes. However, I do feel like Pro Skater 1 and 2 did need remakes, okay? Because if you go back and play those games, I mean, they're still legendary, of course, but obviously they haven't aged the best. And what this game done is completely transformed them into masterpieces. And this game went above and beyond of what was expected, and they just delivered a 10 out of 10 remake here for both 1 and 2 of Pro Skater. They are just so good now. Like, first of all, you can now manual in Pro Skater 1. Hallelujah, that's all I wanted in Pro Skater 1, and you can do it now. And this game obviously brings back the legendary soundtracks from Pro Skater 1 and 2. There's a couple of songs missing, but most of them have returned, but they also added some new ones in here, which they didn't have to do. Like, a lot of companies wouldn't bother, but this game added its own songs, and most of them are really good fits. Not every song in this game fits, in my opinion. Like, there's a Skepta song in this game that I just feel like it feels out of place, and there's a couple like that, but for the most part, they work really well. Like, the soundtrack here is really good, and the gameplay here is just so smooth, okay? Buttery smooth to play, is just classic Tony Hawk's, how you remember it, but just even better than ever. Graphically, this game is obviously improved from the original, thumbnails, I mean, that's sort of a no-brainer because they're on the PS1 and 2, but it still looks really good graphically, and that doesn't like compromise the frame rates in any way. The game runs really smooth and plays really smooth. Another thing they did with this game that I really liked is they added new objectives into Pro Skater 1. Now, I don't think they did that for Pro Skater 2, but they definitely did it for Pro Skater 1. They added a ton of new objectives because Pro Skater 1 is quite short. There's not that many objectives to complete in that one. So they basically doubled the amount of objectives per level for Pro Skater 1, which is an awesome feature. In terms of Pro Skater 2, they didn't add anything. However, they did take away the cash goal, because if anyone's ever played Pro Skater 2, in order to beat each level, you had to collect all the cash in every single level, which was annoying as fuck. Like, that was never fun for me. I don't mind collecting the cash, but for it to be an objective for every single level, so that in order to beat the game, you have to find the cash in all the levels, that was always shit. Thankfully, Pro Skater 1 and 2 took that objective away, so you don't have to do that anymore. But yeah, on the whole, guys, Pro Skater 1 and 2 is an absolutely amazing remake. If every remake was like this, I'd be all for remakes, okay? This is a great, great game. They gave this game a graphical uplift, they made the game more playable than ever, they've added a ton of new features and content. It's just a great remake, so if you somehow have not played this one, guys, please do, okay, because it is absolutely incredible. Okay, guys, that is going to do it for today, okay? That is all the Tony Hawk's games I've talked about. We talked about 9 games today, okay? So there's still a lot of Tony Hawk's games I've not mentioned in today's video, but like I said, guys, there will be a part 2, okay? So look forward to that. I'm not sure when that's going to drop, but I'm sure it'll come fairly soon, okay? So again, look forward to it, because there's a lot of other Tony Hawk's games that I want to talk about. Other than that, though, guys, let me know in the comments what your favorite Tony Hawk's game is, or maybe your least favorite Tony Hawk's game. I want to know both. What's your favorite and what's your least favorite? Other than that, though, guys, subscribe here if you're new, and I'll see you guys next one, alright? Peace.